was like a breath and a water. Oh, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I live for these nights. I will. I'll be the Leron.
He's going to be the one person in the audience.
I'll be the Leron, yeah.
He'll come to public comment.
Civic
just,
booster.
Just to be like, what are you people doing?
I can't wait.
You guys are still here? All right.
Well, you can also exercise your right to be really unkind.
That's true.
So I feel like
Brand.
public. I just feel like public comment next year is Jeff's opportunity to be like,
And
"You're a Hitler. You're a Hitler. Here's why you're a Hitler." I can definitely see you doing that, Jeff.
We're not live mic here.
So for the record, the Your Hitler line is literally from their lawsuit.
Yes, it's from the
Oh.
the Supreme Judicial Court.
I was going to say we should clarify.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay.
No, it's
That's literally what SJC
someone said
ruled
multiple, yes,
was okay.
was on the comment was that somebody was like, "You're a Hitler because of this, you're a Hitler because of that." They shut down the public comment. And that person sued.
I got some already. Thank you.
And that was unreasonable. So sorry, that is my
Yeah, I
reference.
realize that people didn't actually know the story. That line sounded much worse than it actually is.
You guys don't read articles about Supreme Judicial Court ruling? On public comment?
And you were in front of about 99% of the population.
Yeah, that was the literally the rude thing that we can't.
So look forward to that in public comment in the future.
Wow.
Or we can take
What's
public
that?
comment.
What's that?
It's not my right to be rude. It's speak out in the middle of the meeting.
What?
What was that?
Well, we don't have to
That's what
say
people are gonna do.
that.
That's what
We're not
that's
legally
what
required to do it. So for them to say like,
No.
well, you don't have to do public comment, but if you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Lee.
Lee Palmer.
I had something to do with it too.
We were all in.
Yeah.
That was not just Lady. She made it happen.
I don't actually want to get rid of it, but it is crazy to think
Right.
that you're not legally required to have public comment. But if you
You
do,
have to sit and take whatever views people. Although I'll actually read the ruling.
it's very vague.
It's not all. It's not
It's
all.
super
It's not
vague.
all. There is apparently a line.
But they just don't tell you where the line is.
Yeah, but they can't threaten you, but they can call you whatever they want.
The line is rude isn't sufficient.
Yeah.
That being rude isn't sufficient. There is a line where it is sufficient enough to be no longer civil.
Where it's criminal or.
We're good?
All right.
All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call this March 29th, 2023 meeting of the school committee sitting as a committee of the whole for personnel to order. We have one item before us today, which is the interview for Dr. Ruben Carmona to be superintendent of Somerville Public Schools. Dr. Cody, will you call the roll?
Dr. Ackman.
Here.
Mayor Ballantyne. Ms. Patone.
Present.
Dr. Phillips.
Here.
Ms. Barish.
Here.
President Ewan-Campen. Ms. Krepshin.
Here.
Mr. Green.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Fantastic. So just to lay out the ground rules, we're going to start off by giving you the opportunity to make an opening statement, and then each of the members has been given a category from which they will ask a question of their choosing, and after every question, any question, people may ask follow-ups. After that, we will then go into what we call the free-for-all, where people ask whatever's on their mind. We will do that until all questions are exhausted, and at which point we'll give you the opportunity to do a closing statement.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so with that,
Excellent.
Carmona.
Well, thank you for having me here tonight. It has been really a roller coaster of fun and excitement. I have visited many schools, some that I found very familiar. Many of the students that I've seen are students that I have had in my own buildings in terms of their demographics and the strengths that they bring into the space. I also found that the conversations with each of the different groups have been quite enlightening. And it's clear to me that everyone is rooting for the same goal, which is making sure that this community it gets to the place where it needs to be. I also want to say that just a little bit about myself. I was born in Colombia. And my parents made the sacrifice and the investment in education for me to be here, and 7 siblings. We managed to actually make sure that all of us went to college, and that's the effort and the commitment to public education. And so that's one of the things that actually drives my work, which is commitment to equity that is not just at an intellectual level, but a visceral and emotional level. And also, what informs my practice is the fact that my children are also are full of strength and beauty and genius, but often their strength doesn't show up in the educational, in the academic public setting because of their learning and emotional disabilities. So that's another thing that I feel it drives my my resolve to be a champion for students who need access to learning, especially when they have learning disabilities as well as emotional disabilities. So that's my opening statement, and I also wanted to thank everyone here who has been very graceful in showing me the ropes around the district.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to start with 2 questions. One is a basic question about logistics, namely, if you were selected to be superintendent, would you be able to start July 1st? And if not, when would you be able to start? And so you can start.
Yeah, so the plan is to start in the summer. I have, my wife and I have talked about a visit to Colombia, and so that will be one that would have to be replanned or recalculated. But the intention is that once and if I become the chosen candidate, that a 30, 90, and the 30, 60, and 90-day plan would be in motion. And so my intention would be to be very clear about my next steps. But as far as I know, the intention would be to start early in July.
Thank you. So now I have a question about your core values. Okay. And namely, what are some of your core values? And can you tell me a time when you had to undergo, in your career, short-term pain in defense of your core values?
Gotcha. So inquiry is actually the core value that I always lean on. I believe that we are in learning organizations and that the work needs to be driven by questioning and reflecting about the work that has to happen in every classroom for every student. Inquiry is what drives drove my intention to improve teaching for my students when I was a teacher. Inquiry is the one driver that has allowed me to pause and support teachers when they have a question around their practice. And inquiry is the thing that has allowed me to also reflect about the inequalities that we face in our communities. So inquiry is my sense of equity. Equity is another core value that is not only based on the work that I do, but it's through my lived experiences that I'm committed to the work. The notion that anyone can do the work and that we all need to be supported in the spaces in which we are, regardless bring, is one thing that is one thing that we understand is critical in developing every child in our communities. Equity, again, is something that I hold true to myself and true to my values. The other core value is collaboration. I feel that everything that I've done, everything that has been accomplished in the work that I am has been done through collaborating with others. And the innovation is one thing that I feel that we need to look for better solutions to the challenges that we are facing on a regular basis, and that the old paradigms that we have used to solve the challenges that we face need to be revisited. And the last one I would say is integrity. I think that I have run my life with integrity across the board, and I think that that has been the compass that has allowed me to be consistent about the decisions that I make. As far as the question of what are some of the pains that I have suffered as to uphold those values, I feel that the work around equity is one of those that have allowed me to make decisions that actually have caused significant challenges in my life. I think that being able to fight for the needs of every student and data is one of those ways that allows teachers to make corrections on the spot. That, to me, is the best way to really assess how students are making progress. The other question around, can you repeat the other part of the question?
Sorry, it takes a couple seconds to turn on. How do you use data to inform instruction and help students reach their full potential?
Good. So I think that as a principal, there is no decision that you make in which data is not at the center of a corrective improvement process. So have I used it? Yes, and I usually, when we work with teams on PLCs, that is the work that executive director, in which we have to actually look at how we're spending monies to determine what programs we keep and what programs we remove. One of the ways in which I have made sure that equity shows up in my work is in our diversification work. So we were able to bring our percentages of teachers of color from 6 to 12%, and so that has been a significant improvement. But the other piece around equity in which we have worked as a community has been around creating spaces for people to belong. So I support the creation of the affinity groups in our district. And also the work that we have been doing with the cultural responsive teaching in our district. So that's a work that the executive committee has worked on breaking down the content and supporting teachers to be able to do that in a meaningful way. I work with the Equity Imperative, which is a group that actually supports our anti-racist initiatives. And so one of the things that we do is that they usually share their content with us, and we actually vet the content to make sure that it's the right content. And also, I'm currently working with our curriculum department to create an audit to assess the work that, making sure that it represents the plurality of our diverse students in our families.
Ms. Michelle and then Mr. Yan.
Thank you, through you, Chair Green. You spoke a bit about the increased diversification of the staff in your district. Can you tell a little bit about how you were part of that or worked with colleagues to do that? Because hiring obviously happens across the district. So we'd just like to hear a little bit more about that.
Good. So we have worked in different ways. So I work with the HR department to establish ways in which we actually create the conditions for hiring principals or hiring managers to create a sense of urgency around the times in which we let individuals know when it's time for a transition. We instituted something called the DOI, or Declaration of Intent, which means that we want to make sure that principals are communicating with their faculties around the transitions that are happening at every building. I work directly with TNTP to make sure that we put in place some practices like making sure that the issue of retention the issue of diversification also has to do a lot with retention, because we have noticed that based on our data that we were recruiting folks, but retaining them was a little bit of a challenge.
Can I pause you for just a second?
Yep.
Just for the sake of anyone who might not know, can you elaborate on what TNTP was?
Oh, sorry, yes. It's a partner that does the, I don't recall the acronym, but teacher, the
It's
new
a
teacher
newer
project.
next, but yeah.
Next teacher projects, I mean, they don't use it anymore, they only use TNTP.
Okay, so TNTP, the new teacher project. Okay. And then, so the other, you asked me for specific ways in which I have collaborated with folks. And so the other thing is I work really tightly with the special ed department. They are always recruiting, and so we always are in conversations about who are the folks that they need to bring into their communities to build up their bench. We usually don't have enough teachers in special ed. I also collaborate with our superintendent because one of the things that the goal that we have outlined for the district is around an aggressive goal of making sure that the diversification is not only at the entry level, but at the higher level. So I run some of the screening committees for the principals. So we hire several educators of color at the administrative level. And also we're looking at places in which we can actually promote individuals. And so those conversations are about how do we identify the strengths of folks that are in certain positions. And so in general, I think the work doesn't happen in isolation. I have been collaborating with teachers, with principals, even just any recruitment fair that happens, it doesn't happen by myself. I have to basically collaborate with the entire district. So.
Ms. Dion, then I'll call myself. Okay, great, because my question is a good follow-up to that question, which is that hiring principals is one of the most important things we do as a district, and it's really hard. Can you speak to some of the traits you look for when hiring for a principal and the ways you go out finding those traits? Great.
So the traits that we look up are basically the core values. I think we have been very consistent, and the conversations that we have had at the executive level have been, how are the competencies that we're looking for? We actually, again, with our partners, TNTP, we outline competencies to identify what are the strengths that we look for in individuals who not only represent our core values, but also have some degree of implementation already in their resumes. So what we look for is also affinity towards our core values, which is belonging, equity, and opportunity. And so usually the way we do this search is through a competency model. So we establish the questions, we create the conditions, and what are the ways in which we want these behaviors to show up in either an interview or in different ways that we feel that those behaviors can be drawn upon, like having someone write an essay or having someone have a conversation, or having someone speak to a data set and then explain to us how they can actually achieve a transformation in a school with certain patterns.
Thank you.
Since you've been talking about managing and hiring principals, if you came into the role and you had principals that you hadn't necessarily hired, and you came upon a principal who wasn't achieving what you wanted them to achieve, how would you handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the work that we do with principals is no different than the work that we do with teachers. I think that one of the things that we have to be clear in the process of teaching and learning is that if we understand what are the expectations and we understand what are the metrics by which we are demonstrating achievement, that is one of the ways in which we actually create the conditions for success for everyone. I think clarity is kind, and every time we are clear about the expectations of the work and how it shows up, I think that that's one of the ways in which we can have meaningful relationships in which we can provide feedback to folks. I think most importantly, though, is the work of the principal is, in my mind, is probably the most important work in the design or sustaining a school culture. And I think that exchanging at the level of inquiry with a principal is one of the ways in which we can provide support in ways that are meaningful and also in ways that are in some degree humbling. I feel that even when I met with the principals today, it was clear that they needed space and time to have more collegial interactions and more professional development that is meaningful. And so often, the notion that even at a principal level, we have to hide the fact that we also need to learn is one thing that doesn't help the organization. So supporting everyone through inquiry and inquiry exchange, I think, is a meaningful way to create better conditions for learning.
Ms. Barish.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Green. What strategies would you use to identify and build relationships with different stakeholder groups in Somerville? Can you talk about a time when you had to navigate diverse or even conflicting needs of various stakeholder groups? What was the impact on those relationships?
So strategies, I think that transparency, and I'm going to have to lean on my core values, but transparency, I think, is not only a policy, but is a way to make sure that everyone understands where you're coming from. Another one is finding ways to establish purpose that is similar. I think finding a way to really translate the purpose in a way that aligns in different ways. And also, I think that making sure that we have a two-way communication, it allows folks to be able to exchange ideas in a way that is not only safe, but also creates a collective effort. Strategies that I have done to, what was the other part of the question? I'm sorry.
I was wondering how you would build those relationships with stakeholder groups, and then I would like to hear about a time when you had to navigate, multiple competing interests of stakeholder groups and how you navigated that situation.
Yeah. So an example of that complexity is when we actually, we're currently dealing with the fact that we have a fiscal cliff that is coming up in terms of the monies that are being used to support some of our initiatives. The work that we're doing in the after-school program or the out-of-school time programs. One of the challenges that we have is that, again, we have to, remove close to $1 million to $2 million out of our operating budget that we're using through ESSER funds. And so having the conversations with the special ed department, with families, with the LPAC also, with other different community advisory groups the thing that is important is to share with everyone what are your values, and then finding commonalities among the different interests that we face. But it's through transparency, through talking to people, and through engaging through open communication.
Dr. Ackman.
Thank you. So through the answer to that question and multiple questions I've heard tonight, you've expressed a willingness to be humble and to be vulnerable. From what I've heard, has that ever backfired? That
is a good question. I think that vulnerability, there's always some instances in which that might be interpreted as a weakness. And so in some stages of developing relationships with different constituents, that might have been perceived as a weakness. And so I think at the initial development of relationships, it has. But I think that once folks understand that your resolve and your core values are what drives your interactions, that has resulted in corrections later on. But yeah, so being vulnerable is something that people are not used to. And so it takes time, and also it takes practice. And so I feel that, in order for us also to tackle the issue that we have that we are facing, like the issues of race and the issues of equity, we have to be vulnerable. Otherwise, people are not able to show how they can grow in this continuum of complex ideas. Yeah.
Ms. Kripchen.
How do you view collective bargaining in this era of public education? How have you engaged in this process, and what have you done to make bargaining a tool for improved educator practice, student achievement, and fiscal responsibility?
Yeah, so we, in Lowell as well as in Salem, we were very fortunate that the conversations about collective bargaining were based on the same core values. I understand that unions have a role, and they also respond to some constituents. And so I think that the challenge is making sure that we all understand that we are basically centered on the needs of students. And so often it is in that back and forth of centering the needs of the students and actually identifying how what someone else is asking and what I am asking is grounded by the limitations and the constraints around resources and money. But that process is all about an exchange, a communication. It's like, I am coming from a certain place, these are my values, you are coming from a certain place, those are your values, and then hopefully we find ourselves in the middle. We have collective bargaining. The last experience that we had was one subset of our unit, which was the administrative unit. They actually were looking for a raise in their pay that was a little bit higher than the other. What I tried to do was to identify that their baseline was actually a little bit higher to achieve the same number that they were asking for. It was not in the end, it was not really allow us to actually meet some of our obligations. And so in the long run, understanding what their baseline of their requests allow us to come back to the table and agree on the same, on the final outcome. But I feel that, it's all about the core values of the community, and I feel that there is a place for unions usually have a view that they represent the constituent, and I think that we both are representing the same interest, which is making sure that every kid gets what they need. Yeah.
Acknowledge that Mayor Baunheim has joined us. Ms. Dion?
Somerville has a very active educators union that will want to engage with you on every level. Describe your approach to labor relations. Describe your approach to.
I believe that, again, as I said earlier, that unions have, as their interest, they are representing a group, a constituent in our community. And very often those interests actually are grounded on things that are real, as like the working conditions of teachers overall are difficult. Teaching is rocket science. And so often many of the requests that I hear are grounded in specific needs that I feel that make a lot of sense. And so the relationships that I have developed outside of the conversations, the bargaining units, I feel that is what allows some level of credibility and consistency. And so it is about being human, about being vulnerable, but also about knowing that there is a bottom line, and that if we understand that we also manage the resources and the funds for the community, we have a fiduciary responsibility that is, we cannot abandon it there. So I think that being reasonable about expectations, knowing that we all are aiming for the same, and also being open about the fact that we are all members of the same community as well. So I think that it's just those exchanges outside of that, demonstrating that we all are humans that are also trying to do the same thing.
Dr. Ackman.
We're in the process of looking for a new special education director. What would you be looking for in a new special education director, and why?
Yeah, so I met your new interim special ed director. He, very engaged in the process. And so what I would be looking for is someone who understands the complexities of what it means to teach students that have multiple learning needs. So someone who is a teacher at the center that understands teaching and also understands the complexities of teaching. Also someone who knows how to manage. I think that there is a lot of managerial work that comes along with the special education. And also someone who can innovate. I think that we are responding to the issue of special education sometimes in ways that need to be required some flexibility and some out-of-the-box thinking, because our students need to be getting different services to be able to reach the high expectations that we're putting in front of them. So also someone who is human. I think that the idea that this is a people business is one that we all have to be consistent about. And ideally, someone also who understands the needs of our population, diverse populations. And above all, also someone who can look at data critically, especially with an equity lens, to be able to understand that in special education, there are many places for disproportionality, and that keeping an eye on how those behaviors happen at a district level is critical.
Mary Beth, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
So my question is regarding budgeting. So how do you go about planning for and building a budget? Who do you speak to, consult? What kind of data do you use to build that budget?
Yeah, so the budget process, I have an MBA, so I think that the budget is not a technical thing. Is a budget process is all about a communication process. It's about understanding the values of the individuals who are coming in, who come into the same space to basically compete for the same resources. But a budget is all about centering your values. A value budget-driven process is all about knowing what your needs are, your priorities, and identifying also who are the members of the community that also have a need to have a seat at the table. So that means the students, that means the families, that means the city council, that means the school committee. But it's more about a process and a process of communication and a process of exchange and back and forth, because every time we are looking at resources, we always have to think about what are the priorities and how do we save sacred space to that. The other question around how do we go about building the budget, when we meet with our principals to identify what are their priorities, most of the priorities are already set. 80% of the budget already is chewed up by staff. And so there are some givens already that we cannot escape. So there's 20% of that budget that relies on the new initiatives or the work that is happening that is responding to how we are making the changes to meet our core values. So it's in that space and fighting for those 20% and then having that communication to determine, what are the compromises that need to take place.
Thank you.
I think a brief follow-up. When you say that, budgets are about expressing your values, how do you operationalize making sure your values are shown in the budget? How do you operationalize? How do you measure that? Like, how do you know you've succeeded?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the expenditures that we make around initiatives are also related to the work that is related to the values that we have. So let me just give you a quick example. So, when we decide to have family engagement facilitators for everyone for every building, so that is an expenditure that actually has to, the core value of making sure that we communicate with families is reflected on that expenditure. When we decide that we are going to create an anti-racist curriculum, we actually have to invest on a group, the equity imperative in this case, to be able to join our community to do the work. So the way we translate those ideas is into how we spend our monies. Also, as I alluded earlier, the cost that we have had around our out-of-school time is strictly tied to the needs of the students who need it the most. So, and we have had made some difficult decisions as to why the programs are not necessarily open to everyone, but to the kids that actually need it the most. So that's one way in which we have translated our core values into decisions.
Could you refer to a time when you started a new initiative and budgeted for that, and then realized perhaps that initiative didn't work, and how you handled that?
So I can give you an example as a principal, and then I'll shift to that. So when I was in Lowell, we actually had interventionists, which were the folks who actually allow us to support students to accelerate the learning. And so since that was working well, we actually decided to have also a literacy specialist in the building. Unfortunately, the idea that we needed to elevate the work that was happening didn't work out because the cost of the literacy specialist was too high. And so a promising idea, which was to elevate the work of the tutors and paraprofessionals, was not possible. And so I had to come back to say, listen, although this is a great idea to provide some training and support those who are supporting the kids with the most challenges, we have to back up and then not fund that initiative. The work that we're doing right now at the district level, we are working with, as part of the diversification process was to have also a hiring manager that could actually help us with doing some of the work that we were doing. Also would allow us to be more aggressive in the recruitment process. But unfortunately, as the funds have dried out, so that's work that has to be done by other people. And so although it seemed like a strong commitment to diversifying our workforce, and now it's out of the table, we actually have to come back to leverage the jobs of other folks in a different way. So those have been painful decisions that have actually probably create the impression that we're not fully committed to the work, but the reality of not having the funds had to really force us to really utilize the strength of folks in a different way.
Corruption, will you serve as President Ewing Hampton for a second?
That category was about out-of-school time. So how would you address inequities in access to out-of-school time programming?
Yes, so that is a difficult one. We are actually right now in the middle of that. We are actually how we created the out-of-school time access has been around those students who need it the most. So right now that has always been our baseline. The challenge has been now, how do we also provide access to other more complex needs that we don't have the structure for? And so access for our students who are multilingual learners as well as students with special needs has been our design. And we actually have gotten some pushback as to creating more open spaces for all the kids. Unfortunately, again, the resources are limited, so our communication has been around that we are providing the services to those who need it the most. And so that continues to be our commitment. And and unfortunately, we don't have the funds to provide out-of-school time for everyone. So what we're doing in the process is procuring more grants and finding ways to provide the services to all the students. But the reality is that we are making a commitment to the kids who need it the most, and that has been our commitment.
Call myself then, Laura. I have systems for all of you every night. But thank you. So my to other families, and how is it that we can, so what are some strategies you've used in your career to help multilingual learner families feel engaged, not only in their own child's learning, but in the larger school community?
Yes, so there are a couple of ways in which we have done that. So as a principal, I always made sure that I greeted every single family. That my routine in the morning was always to make sure that I opened the door to every car, I welcome every family, and I make sure that they, usually my multilingual strengths actually is one way that I ease people into the building. So that's my default. Families is one thing that I actually, that's my superpower, if you will. And so that is just the beginning of that, is how to make sure that we create a space for families to feel that they belong in the space. When I work with my ELL teachers or my multilingual teachers, I made sure that they were supporting the teachers in the entire building, so they not only work with their kids, but they also work as coaches. And they're natural and strong, to the point that usually my students, when I was a principal, were really high performing and through the access data. The other thing that we are doing right now at the central level, at the central office level, is that we actually strategically have brought into our executive advisory team folks who actually are speak only Spanish, and we have provided them a voice and empowered them to be part of the advisory team for us. So giving them a space in which we elevate their presence is one thing that we haven't had, and with the executive team, we have been committed to the idea of elevating the presence of those who make decisions and have them at the table. And above all, working with the students, making sure that students are also feel empowered and are valued. And so every time you recognize the strength of a child who is also perceived as in a deficit way, is one way that we actually change that narrative of strength versus deficit. We also, as I mentioned to you earlier, the family engagement facilitator is a member that comes out of our department, and so they, on an ongoing basis, receive support, professional development. During the pandemic, they were the ones who actually were on a regular basis in contact with families, making sure that their needs were met, We track actually the number of interactions that they had with the families. And so they were basically a lifeline for the families who actually needed it the most. And so that's the work that I have done, not only at the building level, but the structural level from the central office point of view.
Through you, Chair Green. My question is about leadership style. Share a specific example of either addressing a challenge or pursuing an innovation that demonstrates to us what your leadership style is like.
Great. So I know that in my first interview, I talked about a servant leadership style, and I feel that customer service basically is that we are a public institution, so actually our role is to make sure that we provide that level of support to families. Serving is what we do. But also, distributed leadership is the work that how we get the work done. I don't think, especially in this role, no one really has the capacity to do the work that is needed unless you collaborate with others. So, as a building principal, one of the things that I always manage to do is to really not delegate the work, but create the work collectively to make sure that we have some teams called instructional leadership teams, so they actually provide in ways in which the power is distributed among the team members, and usually it comes out of the teachers is a representation, is a true representation of the team leaders in every grade level, and so the work that I did, and usually most of the initiative them through the instruction, watching them taking the initiative of kind of leading the building is one of the ways that I managed to do the work in my role as a principal in every building that I've been. So the same structure has worked. At the central office level, I think that we continue to, when we work with principals around the idea of discussing the issues around equity, as well as making sure that we are diversifying our workforce, that has required conversations around how are we really looking into the hiring practices that we have. And so I usually provide anti-bias training to make sure that folks understand that usually the lenses that we bring into that process are biased. And so it's just that some of the defaults that we have. And so having those conversations with principals and hiring managers has been one of the ways in which we have established some distributed leadership.
Dr. Phillips, then Ms. Dion.
Looking at your resume, it is clear you have a rich and long history as an excellent school leader. Your experience in central office is more limited. Help us understand why you are prepared and ready to take the helm of the Somerville Public Schools as our next superintendent.
Yes, that's true. So you can see the strength that I have across the board. In the last 2 years, and let me back up a little bit. So as a principal, I always also have been fortunate to be sitting at the table because of, I think, my strength as a turnaround principal, my strength as a leader, has allowed me to share the space for quite some time. So I have been doing this for 16 years, and so in every building that I have been, in every district that I have been able to share elbow to elbow with those who make the decisions at the higher level. My last 2 years, yes, so they also look like a short period of time in that process, but if you can see the plethora of work that I've done in different places, we are working on creating a new DI department that is being formed under my support, family engagement, recruitment, retention, out of school time work. And so on a daily basis too, I work with the executive team. Our sessions around thinking of what's best for kids has in a high degree, I believe, allowed me to be in the space where decisions are being made, and I have been a full contributor for that process. Everyone has a first year as a rookie, is that right? So everyone, I believe that Mary Skipper was once a new principal, a new superintendent in this district, is that right? Exactly. And so someone, I mean, you gotta get your feet wet somewhere. I mean, part of the question for you, and that's something that you're going to have to grapple with, is does this person believe in the same things that we believe? We haven't asked any questions about strategy and execution, and I believe that that is a place where I also have some clarity around how we deliver ideas and also how we put them in place. And so, but it's a legitimate question and one that only you guys can answer yourselves when you're thinking about that.
I'm going to jump in only because Sarah stole my question for the free-for-all, but I do have a follow-up to it, which is, as you pointed out, everyone has a first year, and in that first year, where are the areas where you would think as a first-year superintendent you would need the most support?
Great. So I thought about this for quite some time. So I'm very familiar with the space of the superintendent. Not the intensity, obviously, because I have not been sitting in the hot seat. But one of the things that I notice is not very second nature to me is the different exchanges that need to happen with usually outside of my purview. I think that the work with the school committee is something that I do on a regular basis. I participate on different hiring and different negotiating committees and the work of the DEI group. So my exchanges with the school committee, more in Salem than in Lowell, has been an ongoing exchange of communication and work that has given me a window of what the work looks like. I hope that part of it, we always say this, that we recruit and we try to get the best, right? However, also the systems that we have in place to support retention are critical. The same applies to, I hope, for the superintendent. So the systems that are in place to support the process of someone who's coming new into this space are something that we owe it to whoever comes into the space. And so, and that's no different for principals, for teachers, or for superintendents, I hope.
All right, going back to your leadership style, the Salem educators I've spoken with had overall good things to say about you. One element that did come up was your management style as a principal, and at times educators feeling micromanaged. Did I go dead? Okay, sorry. And educators at times feeling micromanaged. How do you provide a balance, structure, and autonomy for the people you are managing?
Yeah, so I thought so, or I think so. Depends on who you ask that, right? But no question. That idea about autonomy and norming around expectations, it is difficult. And if we as a community are saying that we are all about equity or all about high expectations, at some points, if we don't share the same values or expectations, I definitely will have to provide some norming around that. And so that might feel like I am encroaching in someone's autonomy. But there is a healthy place where that happens, I believe, and I feel that I cannot be everything for everyone. And so I am very clear about my commitment to students, my commitment to culturally responsive practices, and to making sure that, we have to act with urgency. This is the life of a child is 1 year for a student can make a big difference. So, I understand that sentiment, but I feel that I always have operated with my best intentions around, I believe, autonomy, but also that is autonomy that is within the confines of the values and expectations that we have for making sure that every kid gets what they need. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that ends our first round. So now members are free to ask whatever's on their minds. Ms. Barish.
Thank you. I believe today you met many of the members of our incredible central office. We have a really strong group in place. How would you envision becoming a part of that team and the leader of that team if you were to come to Somerville?
Yes, the conversation that we had today was a very vibrant conversation, I believe. One of the questions that I asked them was around what was the gap around the strategic plan as well as the implementation. And that was a question that gave a lot of pause. So I feel that engaging in that kind of assessment of how we are delivering on the things that we're saying we try to accomplish is a place that I think I can support them. I also, and again, my strength is always about leveraging teams, and I feel that that is one thing that I can support the team in creating ways to achieve the goals that we are outlining for the district. So teamwork is what makes the work happen. And so, I know there was a reference to siloing in some of the conversations, and I feel that that is one of the values that I bring into the space, which is making sure that the intersections that we have also serve the purpose of making sure that everyone communicates with each other. I currently work with our Student Services Department, our Human Resources Department, our Finances Department, and so that exchange as well as our Curriculum Department. Now that part is because everything is in our world crosses the DEI world. So I know that would not be my only function in the work, but it will be about reflection and inquiry in terms of how are we getting to the outcomes that we say we want to accomplish. So that's how I will support the team.
Dr. Phillips.
You've mentioned a couple times that execution is a strength of yours. Can you tell us a little more about your past experiences, your past successes, helping a district deliver on its plans or goals?
Yeah. So as I said, let me just give you as a principle, going from level 3 to level 1 in different places or turning around a school that is in need of support, a middle school, does, give me the sense and the confidence that it has been about execution. We can have the best plans, but if we don't have a good implementation process, it's just not going to happen. The work that we're doing in actually transforming our department into a DEI department is also something that has happened in quite a fast pace, and I believe that we have allowed feedback from all the different groups that we're working with. And in general, the work around diversification in a short period of time, we went from 6 to 12% in a year and 18% overall. I feel that it is that level of execution that has allowed us to get results. You don't get results if you are actually just at the strategy level. So I think implementation is critical.
Tone?
Through you, Chair Green. Give me an example of a time you had to make a decision you knew would be unpopular. How did you approach the situation? What was the result? What did you take away from the experience?
I'm going to start from my principal experience, and then I'm going to go back into. I think that there is a lot of unpopular decisions sometimes that, or not. I shouldn't say it that way, but when you are actually moving a faculty from one place to another, there is resistance. Usually, the resistance rests also on how you communicate and how you provide a vision for the work. But, depending on the faculties that I work with, the gaps have been bigger in some places than others. And so in the work that I did in Lowell around making sure that students' behaviors was not seen as a deficit, but as a communication, we put in place a responsive classroom system across the board. The students could not be sent out of the classroom just because they were being dumped in the office. And so we have to actually make sure that folks understood that by removing a child out of a classroom, you are losing all your power, you're losing all the relationship with the student. So that was an example of something that did not come out well at bigger a couple that work. Actually, folks warm up to that, and the outcome spoke for themselves. Now with our what we call declarations of intent has been a little bit challenging because we are asking principals to identify early on in the process what are the places where they need to have, they need to create spaces for new employees because early hiring is correlated to being able to select master teachers or select what we call irreplaceable. So that part has been very difficult because we instituted that, but principals are taking quite some time to agree to the process because there are some complexities around that when we actually decide to have a non-renewal with someone. It creates a lot of disruptions. And so part of the challenge has been to create the framework for principals to have the conversation so people don't feel that you are abandoning them, but that you're creating, both giving them the time to find something new and also identifying that they might not be a match for the building. There's no easy way to say that. And I know that creates a lot of reservation for principals. And so that's one of the strategies that have been, has taken quite some time to really to really settle for folks. It has worked in different buildings, but ultimately it has resulted in some positive developments for some buildings that have been able to already secure teachers for the following year. And so those are not very popular strategies that have shifted how we do it. We actually always waited until April, close to May, and so that resulted in not having early hiring cycle. So in my mind, it has been worth the pains, but we are still also making sure that, and the fact that there are some complicated cases kind of has shown somewhat of an uneven implementation, but is because it's not a simple process. Yeah.
Dion.
One of your references describes the broad connections between schools, the school system, and the community in which the school is situated. Describe your understanding of these connections here in Somerville.
So the connections that I see are that, you have different groups of students that have different needs, that are coming into spaces that are in which they are they bring some challenges. You have a population. There's a little bit of a mismatch in terms of your educator demographics and the students' demographics. So I see that in some places. I only saw a few schools, and I understand some of the references to the demographics that you have in the district. But I feel that the fact that you also have a community that has grown in such a rapid way, you have newcomers that are coming on a daily basis, and you also have schools that might not have fully equipped to respond to these challenges, is one thing that gives me an idea of what what are the challenges ahead. You also have some populations that are growing and some buildings that are constrained by a space. And you also have some demographics, like your students who are in the autism continuum, that for which you are providing great services, but you also continue to have numbers that are coming in, and that is a challenge. Also, in terms of practices, I think that the idea that you have some populations of students that are need second language support and not probably having a full set of SEI fully developed strategies in the different classes also create some challenges. And from what I understand in terms of your instructional model or your programs that you have, there is a lot of created programs that you have internally, which is great, but that also creates some challenges. Consistency across the board in some cases. And that's my hypothesis again. So, and also the fact that there are creative materials also in some cases puts the burden on teachers to actually continue to build on those materials that are created. It's not a perfect solution in terms of either we buy a package design curriculum or we create it internally. But I know that when we have done that work, has created stress on teachers to actually try to make sense of those materials. You know, my read of the community as well is a community that is fully committed to making sure that equity is at the center of the work, but you still have some uneven outcomes. And so that's a question that begs attention. And that's where most of the work lays ahead. So that's my read of the community. Mm.
Mr. Tone?
Thank you, through you, Chair Green. You may have heard we have a couple of buildings that are not in an ideal learning environment for our students. Can you share a little bit about your own experience as a principal or in central office with working with the community to either, you know, define a new approach or a new plan, or just working with renovating or rebuilding buildings?
So we currently, or last year, we started a feasibility study to build a new high school. We are actually in that process, making sure that it meets our dreams in a way. There are some things that we want incorporated into this design. Again, most of the conversations around that have been around making sure that the different groups that actually are interested in making sure that this reality becomes true is what are the things that the design or the strengths or the benefits that we want for each of the components of the high school. So that process, I'm not at the center of that, but I am basically collaborating with the folks who are involved in that. And so most of the conversations are the back and forth of what's feasible, what's possible, and what is our budget allows us to do. The other conversations that I continue to have with the mayor, his team, and our team is around creating a new wraparound services in the city. We have a location that is being repurposed, and so we have to secure funds from the, we actually secure the funds. The city has to provide the other funds, so we keep on coming back to the city to check where the funds are. And the other side of the conversation has been around the design itself, what goes into different floors, who is going to use what. It is those conversations of like who ultimately is going to be doing actually the maintenance of the building versus who is going to own the building. Actually, there's no questions about who owns the building. That's the city continues to own the building, but it's how do we utilize the space. That back and forth is still an ongoing process. But my experience with that is just making sure that everyone who comes to the table is clear about the outcomes, and also making sure that we stay true to what we say the purpose of that building is.
Any other questions? Ms. Dion?
You talked a little bit about implementing responsive classroom when you were in Lowell. I would love to hear a little bit more about that, or about other experience with social emotional learning and community building that you have.
Yes, so responsive classroom, a little bit more about that. We started the work around, I always been, as a teacher, was a responsive classroom person. So then as a principal, what we did is that there were some teachers who actually were interested in the process. We brought them into different schools to see how that worked. And then they were the ones who actually brought the system back into the community. That's one of the work that, would actually serve us well, responsive classroom, the language, the practices, as well as the expectations are very clear. We also did some work with Charlie Applestein. He does a lot of work around trauma and trauma-sensitive work. So that was a lot of the PD that we did was around that work, and that was something that we did for a whole year. We not only used that work in my building, but I invited other buildings in the district to support that work. And right now, the work that we're doing around restorative justice in our building, in our district, is actually out of the student service department. But one of the things that I did in collaboration with them was having the conversations about how do we make sure that we use restorative justice in instances in which microaggressions take place. And so that is the next phase. We're actually trying to train the school committee as well as the executive team to make sure that they are clear about what restorative justice looks like and sounds like. And then implementing that as a tool to respond to microaggressions. So that's the next phase of the work that we're doing at the district level. And, I think the issue about restorative justice, and you can actually have the conversation that I had with the folks today here at the high school, is that everyone believes that it's a strong system, is a meaningful practice. Unfortunately, the implementation of that also is where discrepancies surface, and I believe that you're just going through the training here at the high school level. But the research shows that usually in places that it doesn't work is when there's no consistency and too much variability between practices in the same spaces. So that's the work that I've done.
Ms. Patone.
Thank you. So you've talked a bit about implementation and inconsistencies. What are some of the practices that you use? It doesn't have to be restorative justice. It can be anything that you've implemented or been part of implementing to ensure that there was consistency and fidelity to whatever is being implemented with staff.
Right, yeah. So data is at the heart of making sure that we have some evidence of how things are happening. And there's not only just qualitative data, but we also need quantitative data. Through feedback from teachers, from surveys. So I recently had a survey with my affinity group to get a sense of how our overall anti-racist work through the equity imperative is working. And so the feedback has been that, there are some gaps. And so right now we're in conversations with the superintendent to think about addressing the gaps that are clear in some of the data that we're getting. So I feel that loop of what we say we're going to do, what happens when we do it, and then what does the data show. Even if we don't have the data, we actually often have to create data points to be able to close the loop in terms of that work. But that's a never-ending process in the work that we do. Is how do we know that what we're doing is happening? In
honor of that question, and in honor of the fact that tomorrow my daughter takes her first MCAS test, what are your thoughts on the strengths and limitations of MCAS, and what other tools can district be using to collect data on each student?
Yeah, so the MCAS, in my mind, is a reference point that is, overall summative data does very little to reflect on growth and achievement, reflect on improvements that have to happen on growth on a timely basis. MCAS will show up next year, so we won't be able to have an individual over a student. There is more growth data, like you have DIVL, so you used to have STAR. So that's the data that actually helps you calibrate your efforts or your implementation of strategies to make sure the kids get the corrective action or the right interventions on a timely basis. But MCAS tells a story, but I feel that that's a story that is a year later is a little bit too far too late. It does tell trends, and so it allows us to determine what are some of the overall trends that we see. But the critical data is the one that we see on a regular basis that allows us to make corrections on the spot.
Going once. Dr. Phillips.
Thanks, through you. Being a superintendent is a political job. Part of the politics is getting what you need and what we need out of our partners, and part of the politics is responding to what people bring to us. What would be going through your mind, or how would you respond if 30 parents came to public comment to talk about an issue that was very important to them, or they decided they were going to shut down a meeting and not let things move forward because of an issue that was very important to them?
I'm guessing that if they want to shut down a meeting or want to be very vocal is because they have a compelling reason to do so. Whether it's right or not is a different thing. I think that usually listening is the first starting point. I feel that as a parent, I also would like my voice to be heard. So I think that creating the space to say, yes, there is a point, let's find a way that makes sense, because if everyone is shouting, actually no one is going to hear anyone, is that right? So creating the space and the mechanism to provide a way to surface those concerns in a way that makes sense, I think that everyone will be amenable to something that allows us to funnel or to channel the discontent. I think this is a democracy, and as I said, as a servant leader, I feel that customer service is our role. I feel that families understand that there are ways to share their discontent and there are ways to listen to them, and if we are given the impression that we're not listening, I think that's what creates that sense of resentment. But if we find a way to really show folks that we are listening, that we might disagree in principle, or that might disagree on the basis of their claim, that's the best we can do. I think if we have a straight logic and we can actually show where we're coming from, I think most people really believe in that.
Going once. Going twice. Speak now or hold your peace till tomorrow. All right, I think we are done. Dr. Kimona, any last words?
I really give you, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for giving me the spot. I want to thank you for having me walking around the building, opening your doors to your buildings, to your spaces in such an honest and open way. It speaks volumes of who you are as a community. And so I really am very thankful for it.
All right. Well, with no further business before this body tonight, we are adjourned. I'll see all of you, except for you, tomorrow.
Yeah.